we're going to get into working on this now. Let me take over. There we go. And share. There we go. All right. So when we're looking at kind of how things go, we've already talked a little bit about components. Told you to start make everything as its own thing. And kind of the reason is if we have kind of here's our file, and I've got some components over here. You can see the file itself. If I just start a new file, it's just a single box, all right? See that right there? It's just that single box. Right there. So single box means one component. So when we start, our file is a single component. And then we can put bodies within it. And so if you're doing only one thing, that's great. You can just make it as a body, you don't have to make it as a component. That's fine. But it's better if you make it as components. And so you can see here, when I look at that, the main thing of the file now has 3 boxes instead of just one. Because now it's a component that has other components within it.
It's a group.
And so it's an assembly, right? And then within that assembly, I have sub-assemblies that have 3, they've got the 3 box icon, so that those things have components within them. And then these ones are just single components. And if I expand these out, you'll see that this group A has a block A, colon 1, a block B, colon 1, and a block C, colon 1. This group B has 3 block A's. So it has block A, colon 2, block A, colon 3, block A, colon 4. And then down here at the end, I've got a block A, colon 5, and I have a group C, which is just a single component, right? So each of those components, I can use this block A in this subassembly group of components. I can also use it up here. Okay? But if I use something more than once, if I use that component more than once, the number after the colon changes to show me which one of those things it is. Yeah.
If you were to affect the first block A, would that affect all the other block A's?
Yes. So that's where we're getting that. Components are the same. So if you look here, my block A is the yellow one. So all of these ones here are block A, and this yellow one over here is block A. Block B is the green one, block C is the red one. This component here is just a bunch of, it's a component just has 3 bodies in it. And also I have a body right here that's that one. And so if I do something to block A, it affects all the block A's. But it doesn't affect anything else. Okay? So components are always identical. Always. So anytime you have a component, it's going to be identical to every other instance of that component. So an instance is just that component being used again and again. So that's the number that's why they're the same name, colon, dun, 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 because they're all variations of that same, or they're same different instances of that component. So if you change one, you change all of them. So this is good for anything that you're going to use more of the exact same thing. You want to try it out one time and just reuse that same thing over and over again. So that's a component. Okay? Whereas these ones, even though I made them the same thing, so I made one component and then I copied it a few times to get those, and then I turned them all into components.
Did you change the material? Is that why they're different?
Yeah, change the appearance for those things. But even though they started out the same, but I made them into separate components, they're always going to be different. Whereas I take that one and I copy it, I copy the component, and now these are going to be always the same. So anytime you want to have things that are the same, you need to be a component, you just copy the component. Don't copy the bodies. And so I've got that shown in Canvas here. That I took those same things and made a drawing out of it. And so anything that I have here as a component will show up here in the parts list. So this one, it was in the main file. This one's, but it's a body under the main thing. It's not a component. And so it's not going to show up in the parts list at all. Only the components will show up in the parts list. But now I can see 1, 2, 3, 4 are my different components that were in there. Then if I look at each of those, so I look at that first one here, where I copied the bodies and then made them components, they show up as separate components, and so one of each thing. So this, if they want our parts to be different, so if they're gonna be different somehow, we'd want to do that. Or we'd want to have separate components. But if we want them to be exactly the same, we want them to be the same component, so it shows up as one line item with a quantity of more than one. So like if you're doing a table and the legs are all the same, you don't want to make one leg and copy that component to the other legs, rather than doing mirror, which would make a new one on the other side that's different. Okay? Because we don't want to have 4 legs listed out like this when they're all the same. We want to have one of them and say use 4 of those. Okay?
So if each leg was a different material,
then yeah.
Okay.
But if they're all identical, you don't want to make a component and then just copy that component and then reattach it. And then here's the one with bodies. It just shows one thing for all 3 of those pieces. Even though they're separate bodies, it's still one component, so it's only going to give you one label for it. Okay? So let's see what that looks like in practice. So if I create some kind of thing here. So if I tell it to be something, I tell it to be a new component. And I say, okay, I've created my component. So if I go to move, and I tell it to move the component, I pick it, I say create a copy. Now you can see it's component 1, 1, component 1, 2. And if I rename it, it renames both of them.
So if you copied it and did that, how would you then make it a separate component that is not then affected by the first?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
So as long as it's a component, it's a copy of the component, it's always going to be the same. So I have this one here, that's that one. I make a new copy of here, so just Control V, Control V. It's a new component. All 3 of these, if I change one of them, it changes all of them. Okay? That's what components are, exactly the same. If I decide that I want to have it, so let's create something on here to make them not symmetrical. There we go. So I've joined that together. So now I've got 3 separate components here, and if I do a change on one, it's going to change all of them, right? But let's say I need to make a mirror image of this. So I want to make an opposite version. How do I do that?
Mirror command, right?
Mirror. So if I just go in and go to mirror and tell it mirror components, I pick this in here. Now I get a new component that's a mirror of that one. If I do any changes now, it doesn't affect the mirror. because the change happened after the mirror. If I just go back in the timeline before the mirror and make a change, now I'll go back to after the mirror and the change is there.
Is the mirror considered a new component?
Nope, the mirror is the feature that's making that new component. Okay? So whenever I want to do this, if I have mirrored pieces, so a left version and right version, if I want to make that change before the mirror, I can do that. I can also do it after the mirror, and it affects only that one side of it. So you can always do stuff, make most of it, mirror it, and then do anything that's different on each side. That's great. But what if we want the same basic one here, but I want a different one of that without the hole, and one with the hole? What do you guys think? So I want to be able to have this same thing, one version that has a hole, one version that doesn't have a hole.
Maybe right-click on the box on the left and then make it save as different components.
So I can do a save a copy as, and save it out as a new file, and then bring it back in. That's kind of a pain. What I can also do is, you see I expanded this? Look, it's got bodies, right? So I can just go in here and go to symbol, and I can create a new component. And I was going to make, so the parent component is up here, that's good. I'm just going to call it box 2 and say okay. So internal means it's going to stay in this file, external means it's going to make another file for that. So one of the benefits of Fusion is that we can do all the parts to the assembly in one file. So that means you can edit them all kind of with each other. So we want to do it internal. I'm going to say okay. And so, everything went away. But see, when I made that new component, it put the box here, and so it activated this one component. So I can go through and I can activate individual components, and it'll show show mainly that one thing, and kind of gray everything else out. If I want to see everything, I just can go back up and activate the main component, and that turns everything back on. All right, so I've made this new component, but there's nothing in it. So I'm just going to go into here in bodies. I'm going to go right there, copy that body there, go into this component, and paste.
So you kind of just made a file and you're just pasting it into the file?
Yep. So now here's, so I just grab this one, tell it to move. And here. So now this one is box 2, this one, or box 1. So now if I do a hole up here, it affects the copies of that box 1, but it doesn't affect this one that I created from that one.
That was the question. Why would you do that though?
Because I want one with a hole, one without a hole.
Yeah,
Like that.
sometimes, like, what if you need a copy of that, or only one, or you have to change?
Yep.
Need it to stay like that.
Yep, so that's where we do this one. If we need, it's mostly the same, but it got a little bit of differences. You can copy it there, but if I go back before the copy, see right here's the copy. If I go back before the copy and I make any changes to it, and I go back here, that fillet's there. Because I made the change before I copied it. So I made the fillet before I made the copy.
Oh, so before it's like a...
So remember the timeline. The history matters.
You move it after, and it'll change.
Yep.
the value.
So if I move that after the copy, now it doesn't affect that anymore. Okay. So we can always kind of go back and forth.
So what you did was you took it out of that file.
Yeah. So instead of being, I copied the body from that component and just put it into another component.
Okay.
So now then I can make that component different. But it still knows, okay, it was made here, and I can kind of work back and forth. Okay, does that make sense? And when I ask, does it make sense? I'm just making sure that I'm explaining it a way that makes sense to you guys.
Yes.
Because I know that sometimes when I say things, it's like, whoa. So if it doesn't make sense, if you're like, I have no idea what you said, just be like, Okay. It's a reflection on me being able to explain it the right way for you guys.
You're doing pretty decent, so most of the stuff, I think this guy, it's step by step, so it's repetitious.
Yeah, and so I'm just kind of showing you the basis of it right now, just so you can see how you can do it. So so one component automatically gets copied to the other ones. If we have mirror images, we just mirror the component, not the body. Because if I mirror the body, that'll just make another body within that same component, right? So then I can join it or whatever. But if I want to do a full another piece, the left-hand version, the right-hand version, I need to mirror the component. And I can also do the subcomponents and things. So I could go into this component here, and actually, I want to let you guys play with this for a little bit. Just doing the standard pieces. But I also want to show you another piece of it. So let's say I have some shape that I want to use over and over again. I want to do a cutout that's the same shape where I want to be able to add stuff in, like a connector on a piece of track. I could go in and I could create a piece. So capture and coincident corner there we go. So I'm going to make this, and instead of doing it, I want to be able to take this and add it in to some pieces and cut it out of some pieces. So instead of doing join, I'm going to do a new component. I'm just going to say OK. And so here's my component. I'm just going to call this tab, whatever it is. So if I have that component here, you can see I can drag it around. And if I revert, it goes back. Because in here, it always wants to go back to where it's supposed to be. If you go here and you say capture position, then it'll capture and save it moved.
Oh, so that
Okay.
then that'll be the default position?
Yeah, so this is, and it kind of shows down here, this little, that same icon here, showing that that's where I moved it there. Because here I can just kind of move stuff and just put it somewhere for right now. But
Is there any way to center this on a part?
that's what I'm going to show you next. And so, yeah, I can move this off here. It doesn't matter where it was when I made it, because when I move it, I can move it and line it up to things. So right here, this joint command, this is how we put components together. So one way is we can draw stuff lined up where we want it to be. That's an easy way. We can draw where it wants, and then we can tell it to do an as-built joint and just lock it in place where it is. Ooh, duplicate with joint. That's a new one. I have to try that one. This is a new command. I think I remember this one just came out in one of the last updates. I haven't tried it yet. So if I draw it in the exact right spot, I can just use it. But I can also move stuff around based on joints. So I'm going to take that tab. I'm going to create a copy and paste it. And I'm going to stick it over here. And I'm going to, copy and paste it. Move another one over here. So I'm going to just do a couple of these out here. And so I've got some of these tabs stuck in there. So I want to use some of these to add a piece in, some to take a piece out. And so I can use this joint command here to move stuff around. So I'm going to use this joint. So let's pretend I'm going to add that one in there. But this one I want, on all of these three, I want to stick it on this corner. So I'm going to, as I'm kind of on the face, I can snap to the center of the face, or kind of so I have the center of that circle there, I have the center of that edge, I have the corner, I have the center of that line. So if I move on this face, now I have the center of that face, center of the edges or the corners. so I can kind of bounce around. So if I can either get close to it and click, or I can be up here where I'm dragging it and just click, and now I can just move around and decide where to put it. So sometimes if you're not sure exactly where to put it, pick on the face you want first, and then you can move around. So one of the things here is that kind of by my mouse, that little circle moving around has got you can see it's kind of got a circle out here, then a little white circle here, and then the red, blue, and green lines for the axes. So when we do our joints, we're gonna put that little circle on both parts, and it's gonna take the two circles and stick them together. So it's gonna make the two circles line up with each other. The blue axis is facing either the same direction or opposite directions, but with the circles on top of each other. So if I'm on this surface, the circle is going up facing that surface. I go on this surface, you can see the circle turned is now flat on that surface. If I pick an edge, the circle is perpendicular to that edge. And so picking different things will kind of, you're holding it different ways. But it's always going to move that circle to that same thing. So if I pick here, and that circle's facing up, then I pick over here and the circle's facing up, and it's going to move it over there. And like I said, sometimes it flips it, but I can just hit flip and now it lines it up. Now the center of that edge is lined up with the center of that edge. If I had accidentally picked this direction along the edge, it would be going that way. So it takes the two circles and lines them up. Okay? I'm going to go back. So I just take that off. I want it to be that edge. Bring it in there. So I bring that in. I can say OK. And now it's lined up over there. And I can do one over here. And actually I want to put, so I can grab here and I can do the same thing over here. I can grab that back edge and I want to put it on that back edge. And I want to flip it. I want that to overlap. So I'm going to cut into this one. And so I'm going to say OK. And then, sure, I'll do this one. I want to have over a little bit. So I'm going to put on this surface here. I want it to go here. So I'm going to flip it. And I'm going to rotate it around to it straight. I want to move it over a little bit.
Can you put it on there and use it to cut?
That's what I'm going to do. And so when we're using any kind of components, we can always use the joints to put them together. And when we're doing that, we have lots of options for motion. And so we'll get to some of these later, but like right now I want to show you this. So I can do this kind of a standard feature. I can drop it in on these different components. And then I can use my combine tool here. And I can say my target body is here. And the operation do I want, so for tool bodies, I want these two. I want that to be my first tool body. And I want to keep the tools. And I want to join and say OK. So now you can see it's stuck it to it. See if I hope not to. Does only that one go away? Yeah, all of them. All of them go away. So I don't want that. So I want to make sure I tell it keep the tools. So that way it keeps that tool there. And then whatever. Oops. That one I can turn off that tab and leave it there. So now I can also combine, that one. Oops. I want to use that, and I want the tool body to be this. Keep the tool, join. Target body here. Tool body there. Keep the tool, join. All right. Now I can turn off that one. Over here, combine. My target is here. My tool is that one. I want to cut. and I cut that same size in there.
Okay, so tool body is,
The thing that you want it to add or subtract with.
thank you so much.
And then target is here, tool body is there, I want to join, and then I can turn off that one. Because these ones I was just using to stick it together. And now I can use these, and you can see that now I added that last one. It added it to all three of those components. Because they're all, remember, they're the same. And so now I can stick it together, so I can assemble, or do a joint. I can grab that arc there, stick it on that arc there. Now I can lock it at 90 degrees and put those two pieces together. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. And so when I'm doing these other constraints, I have lots of options. So like I could do a slider joint. If I want to show we don't have to put this thing together, I could do that, and now I can just, oops. So one thing is, if everything is kind of floating, everything moves. So if I take a piece, I don't want this piece to move anymore, I can right click on it here and say ground. So now that one is pinned. So now this piece can't move, but other pieces, if they have some kind of motion, they can move relative to that first one. So now I can show that, oh, this piece comes up out of there. It goes into it, but I want to more go up.
What are you pressing to move it? Like
I'm just clicking and dragging.
you're just clicking and dragging?
Yep. It'll only go up and down, not side to side, because I told it in the joint to be a slider in that direction.
Now, does that only work because you did the joint
Yep.
or the assembly thing?
Yep. Yeah, if I didn't do a joint, if I just took this one here, let's see, if I just moved it from, so if I went point to point, so I moved it from, from the center of that to the center of that. Why did you not move? Oh. Move. Components. Now I can do it center. So center there, to the center there. And then I tell it to rotate. If I just did that, you can see it's a lot more work, but now I can move it. It's not stuck. But if I do a joint, it's one command to move it all where I want it to. And depending on what I use for motion, it can either be fully stuck. So right now I can't move it at all. Or I can tell it that I want it to allow it to revolve. And I can tell it which axis I want to revolve on. And I can also do a custom axis. Or I can tell it to slide. So by default it wants to slide in the z-axis, with the axis kind of the direction the circle is facing. But I can also tell it to slide that way, or that way, or that way. Or I can tell it to be a cylindrical, so it can go in one direction and spin around that same axis. So it can slide in one direction and spin. So if you like had a, you got a ring on here, it can slide up and down, but it can also spin around that. I can tell it to be, and again, you can pick which direction we want to go. I can tell it pin and slot, where now it slides in one direction and rotates against a different axis. See, it's moving in one direction and rotating the other way. So we can do that with the pin and slot. We can do planar, where it just has to stay on the same plane, but it can move anywhere or rotate anywhere. Or we can tell it to be a ball joint, and now it's only constrained that by the one point. So when we have any two objects, or an object we're trying to lock it down, everything has 6 degrees of freedom. It can move in 3 directions, right? Move in the x-axis, the y-axis, and the z-axis, or any combination of those 3. 3, and it can rotate around each of those 3 also. So that's the 6 degrees of freedom. And so by picking different options, we were constraining degrees of freedom. So in ball, we've constrained the position, but it can rotate in all 3 directions. In planar, we were only constrained one dimension. It just can't move up and down, but it can move X, Y, and rotate, so it's still free by 5 degrees of freedom. When you use rigid, you're constraining all 6 degrees of freedom at once. If you're go to revolver slider, now you're only constraining 5 of the 6 degrees.
What would you need rigid for?
Those pieces, they're always gonna be locked in that position when you put them together. They're gonna stay there, they're not gonna move. Use rigid. If you want to watch something, pivot like a hinge or something, then you can use revolve. If you want to show like a drawer sliding in and out, then you use slider.
So, this feature here, as a machinist, if you were, you just using this to put things together, right?
So this is where we make sure everything fits.
Just everything fits as the designer.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's kind of on the CNC side, they're just drawing parts and they're going to make what they were told to make. In here, we're learning to design stuff and making sure the whole assembly works and things like that before you send it out to the shop. So kind of it's the same thing, same tool, but 2 different approaches for it. But yeah, we always want to make sure our assemblies fit together and move correctly before we, send it out. And that's why we can test it here, do it a 3D print. Make sure it works there, and before we go and actually cut metal. Because even though the 3D printers take a little bit more time than just cutting a piece, sometimes cutting a piece is way faster than 3D printing something. But if you're taking the time, the programming time and the machine time, it's still sometimes faster. Because if we're doing a print here that maybe takes 3 or 4 hours, when you can program it real quick, if it's something simple and you can cut it in, an hour. But the plastic costs a lot less than aluminum, and the wear and stuff on the tools. So it's still a better thing sometimes. So does that kind of make sense though? How we use joints and to put our components together. If I had just a body, so if I just took a piece here, let's say I just drew something, and I extrude this as just a body. Then I can make this go to it. But this thing right here is never going to show up in my drawing. And if I just had 2 bodies, like if I just had, as in here, and I did 2 bodies by themselves, the new body, I can't do the joint because there's no components. Because it's one component with 2 bodies, but those bodies have to stay the same to each other. And so like if I go over here and I go into this box 1, so I'm just gonna activate this because I want to do something, and I create, sketch here. And so I want to make something in here. Extrude. And if I do it as a new body, it's now inside of box 1 I have 2 bodies. And so everywhere that there is box 1, I have both the cylinder and the piece, and they move together. So those ones can't move because they've got joints, but this one that's not, they're stuck together. I can't move those. But if I go in and I go to move and I pick the bodies and I just move that body, now you can see it moves it on all 3 of them. Because the relationship between those 2 bodies that are in the same component has to stay the same all the time. They can't be different. Okay? Does that make sense? So that's kind of, I think one of the hardest things to kind of get your head around here sometimes is the relationship between bodies and components. And so I want you to kind of do something simple like this. Not even doing full part. I mean, yeah, we could do this and break it down into a bunch of bodies, components, and things. But just kind of get your head around it. I want you to make some bodies, make some components, maybe even start grouping them together some if you want to. We'll come back and talk about that more kind of later on. But for right now, I just want you to spend some time, make some pieces, and start playing with making a couple different components, or even the same component, just make copies of the component, and then start using the joints to put them together, and see how that works out. Okay? Any questions on any of that?
Is the new feature where you can copy and paste joints, is that?
I haven't even tried that yet, so let me.
Yeah, I haven't either, to be honest.
Let me play with it.
All right.
Any other questions? So anything you bring in from another file is a component. So like if I have these things here, you could make one file and just oh, I haven't saved this yet. So save. So I could grab this other stuff and just drag these in. Oh, yeah, your screen didn't like that, huh? But now you can see that came in, and it's a component, and it's got this link button because it's linked to this file. So if I go back and change this file, it's going to change it here. But I can bring in a few different pieces. So if you want to, you can bring in some other parts, and then start and play with doing joints between those other parts and things. Yep.
Is it possible to unlink it
Yep.
from that? Okay.
Yep, just right click on it, break the link.
Cool. So now if I change the original, I'm no longer changing.
Correct. It also means you could edit it here inside of this file now without having to go back to the original one. And so, yeah, so you can just bring stuff in and start trying to play with it a little bit, okay? So like bring in the screw here. Well, you guys did that screw, right? Yeah. So now you can bring this in, maybe put some holes in, make some copies of the screw, do some joints, okay? So I'm gonna let you play with this probably till 11:30. So I'll give you a little over an hour so that we get time for a break and to work on it. And then we'll come back and we'll kind of talk more about some nesting stuff, some other things, okay?